Hey everybody, welcome back to the program. Today I'm going to be counting down my top 10 albums of 1969. Now this was a Patreon poll topic. It was voted on by my members over on Patreon. If you want to find out more about that, you can click the link in the description or the card right up there. But basically for as little as $1 a month, you get access to all kinds of cool features, including voting on videos like this in the future. So go check it out if you haven't already. But if that's not your style, at the very least, hit subscribe. It actually makes a huge difference here on the channel. All right, so we're gonna break down my top 10 albums of 1969. We're gonna start with George Ben. Now, I probably butchered his name, and I'm sorry about that, but man, this guy is amazing, and I only recently discovered his music, which is a shame, and that's on me. That's my mistake. This guy wrote some of my favorite bossa nova songs of the 60s, and you might as well go to the source, right? And this self-titled album is just brilliant. It is a party on wax. Both sides move at a great clip. It's tropicalia, bossa nova infused with just a little bit of psychedelia, and it's just the perfect blend of these genres. So much fun to listen to. At number 9, I have Led Zeppelin 2. If you watch my worst to best video of Led Zeppelin, you know that I rated this one above their debut, and that's why this one makes the list. It's not my all-time favorite record, but it is awesome, and I had to put it on my top 10 list. It's just a classic rock-defining record. Not classic rock-defining, but just in terms of rock music, especially going forward past 1969, this really laid a lot of important steps that I think other bands took and then, you know, went off in their own direction. And I just also love the mystique about the Ludwig cut. And to me, this record is synonymous with record collecting and why I love record collecting. And so I had to include this album. At number 8, I have Isaac Hayes with Hot Buttered Soul. This is his second studio album, and it just blows me away. It is a sonic soul odyssey. What he does with this music, it transcends like the notions of soul at the time and just said, hey, this can also be soul music. And there's a middle section in here where he has this spoken word, and it could so easily be cheesy or over the top, but he has such conviction and swagger about it that it totally works. And to me, this is what makes Isaac Hayes so great. At number 7, I have Miles Davis with In a Silent Way. And this is another new discovery for me. And what I love about this record is that it is very creative and imaginative. Every beat feels like something new is gonna happen. And it has this overall kind of cosmic feel, not like with sound effects, but just with the use of keyboards and other instruments to kind of create this like otherworldly kind of feel. And I feel like that's gotta be inspired by the psychedelic movement. But yeah, I'm so glad I checked this record out because it's one of my favorites. At number 6, I have the debut self-titled album by Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And this is one of those records I grew up with. Not really necessarily knowing that, it's just my parents love this album, love this band. And so subsequently I was exposed to their music very early on. And so I have this it's not even nostalgia really, but just it feels like home to me. And so this record's very important. Plus the music's great. And it's that perfect line between folk and pop music, great songwriting. It's got that canyon sound that people talk about from this time period. And it has such a good feeling for me that it's one of those rainy day records. At the number 5 spot, I have David Bowie's second self-titled album, also known as Man of Worlds, Man of Music, or in the case of my copy, Space Oddity. Now, I wouldn't call this his best album ever. However, if you look at what came before it, this is leaps and bounds better than that. No offense, but his first record just, it didn't feel right. And so in many ways, I look at this as his do-over, because it's another self-titled David Bowie record. And to me, in a lot of ways, this record laid the groundwork for Bowie going forward. His style, his presentation, it's important for all those things. Plus, of course, he had his first real big hit with Space Oddity. And It's a fantastic single. I really love the melody of Letter to Hermione, but overall this record's got a great ebb and flow. It plays very nicely as a two-sided experience, and yeah, I knew I had to have David Bowie on my list, and I'm happy that it's this record. At the number 4 spot, I have the Velvet Underground's third album. This is another self-titled release. This record it's put together very nicely. It's very concise, and it's sort of like they trim the fat. On their previous release, White Light, White Heat, there's some really long songs on here. And granted, there is an 8-minute track on this album, but I feel like they at this point, they're much more together as a band and refined, and they know what they want. They get in and they get out, and overall, this record has a very good album flow, and I never want to skip a track, and to me, that's a very good sign of a well put together album, and that's why it's so high on my list. At the number 3 spot, I have Nick Drake's debut album, 5 Leaves Left. Oh my goodness, I love Nick Drake. I love his music. I obviously made a whole video about his life, his tragic life story. Check that out if you haven't already. But this album is just a fantastic debut. It is acoustic folk, and it's sung with Nick's velvety smooth voice, and he delivers these very poetic lyrics, and it's just the perfect combination of all these things. And it's just, do yourself a favor if you haven't heard this album, check it out. Check out Pink Moon. Check out Brighter Later too. All very different. And but this one especially holds a dear place in my heart because he was in such high spirits. He was so full of positivity with this record. He just wanted it to do so well. At the number 2 spot, I have King Crimson's In the Court of the Crimson King. This is their debut album, and what a debut this was. Oh my goodness, it is a genre-defining record, and it continues to inspire listeners, musicians of all backgrounds. This is just a phenomenal record, and I don't have to tell you that. I did a whole review on this. Most people have heard of this record by now. It's kind of a no-brainer, but what else can I say about it? It's In the Court of the Crimson King. And at the number 1 spot, no surprise, Abbey Road by the Beatles. I debated putting it at the number 1 spot for a while. I was like, well, maybe it's number 2 or number 3 because of Maxwell's Silver Hammer. It's not my favorite song in the world. But, you know, the more I went back and listened to it, and it's got some of my favorite songs of all time on here. And because of that very fact, it had to be number 1. And if you've been a long time viewer of the channel, you know that over the years, my opinion on my favorite Beatles album has changed. It's starting to shift away from the White Album and more towards Abbey Road. And so, you know, this is just more evidence to the fact that this is becoming my favorite Beatles record. The last thing I want to talk about is like just making these top 10 lists. It's very interesting. I feel like most people can pick out 5 to 7 records off the top of their head, but then when you start trying to round out your list, it gets a lot harder, and you start looking at other people's lists, and invariably you start finding about albums you never knew about before, and that's kind of what happened to me, especially with George Ben. I didn't know about his work before this, and I'm so happy that I discovered his work now. And then there's other bands like Pink Floyd who didn't have their best work in 1969. There was a lot of that. Aretha Franklin is another case of that. You know, and I didn't pick the Rolling Stones, Let It Bleed. It's just, there's a lot of songs on there that I have to skip. Also, Bob Dylan. I like Nashville Skyline. I just, in general, it's not my favorite album. And then there was a lot of albums like Trout Mask Replica, which are incredibly influential and important to the overall scheme of things. Another one would be Tommy by The Who. But it's not like a record I love to listen to. And that's really what formed the basis of my top 10 and what led to the different choices and why I picked the albums that I picked, because I love listening to these records. It's always fascinating when you think about why did you pick the records that you picked and why didn't you pick other ones, because You know, everyone's gonna have a different top 10 of 1969, and there's always that thing, like, do you wanna just pick obscure releases because you wanna be cool, or do you do what I did and just kind of picked heavy hitters? Because I did. I picked a lot of records that routinely come up on best albums of 1969. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Love what you love. There's nothing wrong with that. So with all that, let me know what your favorite albums of 1969 are. They could be a top 10, a top 20, a top 5. Leave a comment down below. Until then, thank you all so much for watching. I'm your Vinyl Geek, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Hey everyone, thanks again for watching this top 10. Now, if you want to find out more about my Patreon, there's a link right there, as well as some more videos that I'm sure you're gonna love.